Welcome back, Factually Football fans. Cody and Adam coming at you this week, talking a little Week 2 Colts football and the AFC South as well. So excited to be back with you. Excited to talk about these games this week. Excited to get off the schneid, I guess, maybe the easiest way to look at it, Cody. But hey, the reality is we're at the top of the division right now, as crazy as that sounds. So.
Oh my gosh. I tell you what, man, week 1 of the NFL, pure madness of the AFC South, and I love it. I love every minute of it. Obviously, it'd be nice to say we're at the division lead with actually a win. But hey, you know what? It's not a loss, so I guess I'll take it. Just kind of a weird thing. You know, what the heck? By the way, I'm just going to say ties are the dumbest thing in the NFL, I think, and in football and sports. I hate ties. So, you know, if the Colts had a halfway competent kicker, we wouldn't be talking about this. But here we are, man. At least we are, you're right, tied for the division lead right now. And hopefully this week is the week we officially take it for ourselves.
Well, and there's a player to not be named that I have a somewhat of an acquaintance with, if you will. And he also has the same sentiments. So, yes, ties should not be a thing, especially in professional sports. This is not a participation trophy thing. So sorry if that offends some of you listeners, but the reality is we play this game to win. So with us not going on a filibuster about that, because I could probably go on and on and on. Let's talk about the first kind of game, not chronologically this week, but let's talk about Houston and Denver this week. Obviously, Houston coming off the tie with the Colts, Denver coming off a loss to Seattle, where Russell Wilson, I would say for me, Denver's approach last week was really interesting. You saw a team with 2 good running backs and a veteran quarterback have 71% pass plays last week. Cody, what do you make of that in Denver?
Denver's weird, man. Denver's a really weird team. How in the world do they, lose to Seattle, who a lot of people are regarding as probably going to be a top 5 team pick in the NFL draft this coming year? So what in the world happened? You're right. I don't understand the approach when you have Melvin Gordon, who's always been a really solid back, and then you have Javonte Williams, you mentioned, as well, who's a really, I think, up-and-coming running back in this league. And, it was kind of like, honestly, it was weird because it kind of almost reminds you of kind of the inverse of what the Colts did at the end of the season, where they were like too much on, relied too much on the running game. But it's kind of the flip flop here. It's like, what in the world is going on? So yeah, it just was weird. It's like just you have the players to have that balance. Just be balanced, So it's just very, very odd.
It is, and I was trying to dig, as we want to do here on this program, where kind of look into some of the stats, and PFF has this really interesting stat, and I'm working really hard to try to get an understanding statistically of how they measure it, but they call it turnover worthy play percentage. Interestingly enough, Russell Wilson, had an okay game last week, but he had 4.25% turnover worthy plays. That compared to Davis Mills' 2.38%. Again, those are quote unquote low percentages, but Russell Wilson to me has always been a guy that took care of the ball. So I'll be very intrigued as to how this game plays out. We obviously saw Houston last week not have much of a running game, and if they did, it was kind of a, for lack of a better term, or to use our over the pond football friends word, kind of a cheeky running game, I guess. Little gadgety, kind of some Rex Burkhead mixed in there. I felt the place that they gave the Colts some problem is the place that they've always given the Colts problems, which is that Brandon Cooks. Pretty much, it's pretty much Brandon Cooks and a indescript tight end, and obviously last week that was the OJ Howard play, right? So. Thoughts on Houston in this game? Welcome, Andrew.
I'll be intrigued. Sorry. Yeah. Oh, no, you're fine. Andrew, go ahead.
Houston game. I honestly, kind of surprising. You know, a good friend of ours, Zach Kiefer, who covers the Colts for The Athletic, tweeted out, I feel like I'm watching the same season opening game every single year. And I have to agree. For whatever reason, the Colts and season openers, they just don't get along. It just doesn't end up going well. And the Colts, for some reason, I think just kind of got too cute early on, particularly that fourth down call, fourth and goal call, Nyheim Hines, wildcat type of formation. That play got blown up. And then, you know, that drop touchdown from Alec Pierce, I think, changed the entire narrative of the game early on. And then before you know it, you're down 20-3 and having to engineer a fourth quarter comeback. So the Houston game, we'll see how it affects their record at the end of the year with, you know, the game ending in a tie. But there were some things I came away that I was impressed with. I feel like, and I feel very comfortable in saying that if Carson Wentz is your quarterback, I don't know if you come back down 20-3, you know, that late in the game. Of course, the defense made a play. EJ Speed in particular made a play. Kwity Paye had an outstanding overtime with 2 sacks. And Matt Ryan, you know, poised and composed as he's been in his 14-year career, helped the Colts engineer what should have been a fourth quarter comeback and then ultimately a win.
And Andrew, what do you think about this Houston-Denver game? Sorry, I know you popped on. Just talking about Houston-Denver and what maybe the Houston offense brings towards Denver this week, who showed some, we were talking about some just kind of interesting 71% pass plays last week for Denver. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I was kind of surprised between the Denver game and Seattle game last week or last Monday. I kind of thought Denver came out a little flat, to be honest with you. I thought that Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy and Alberto, you know, some of the better weapons that Denver offense has would be a bit overwhelming for a very below average Seattle defense. And it turned out to be, I think, the exact opposite. Now, you talk about self-inflicting wounds. Denver had, I think it was 2 goal line fumbles, like within the 5-yard line. And this game's an entirely different story if they don't fumble the ball twice in their own or twice prior to scoring. Yeah, Seattle, surprisingly, Geno Smith looked decent. Denver's defense, it's week 1. We love overreacting to the first week. It's like a staple of every, podcast.
Media coverage in general, right?
Exactly. It's like everybody, overreaction Monday is what we like to call it. Listen, there are 17 weeks left in the entire season, and nobody knows a thing about anybody. The Colts, for example, within the last 2 or 3 years, 1-4 last year, 2018, 1-5, and were 9-8 last year and 2 games short of the playoffs, and won 10 games the following year and made the playoffs. So let's just, as an example, say that once you hit November or December, sure. But right now, I'm not going to overreact to Denver and their miscues. I don't anticipate them fumbling 2 or 3 times inside their own opponent's territory. If they do, they've got some really big problems. But defensively, I just think for Denver, it's one of those things where I just felt like it was kind of sloppy. To be honest, Bradley Chubb made a couple nice plays. Defensively, they couldn't really stop. I think Tyler Lockett had a nice game. I think DK Metcalf had a couple of nice catches. I would have hammered the over in terms of points for Denver. I would have thought Denver would have came out and smacked Seattle. To be honest with you, I didn't think it was going to be relatively close. And I guess that's a very long-winded way of saying, like most of the Week 1 games, I'm shocked to see the result.
Yeah.
Go
ahead, Cody. Sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry. It honestly, like what Denver did not do against Seattle, by far an inferior opponent, it almost reminded me of what Indianapolis did in certain ways where, it's like they're more talented, but they just, when it mattered, like you talk about the fumbles and just the critical situations where they just make mistakes and they mess up. And honestly kind of reminds me of how the Colts did against Houston. Everybody would say Indy's far and away the more talented team than Houston, but just dumb, unenforced errors that they did. It just kind of, gives me a similar vibes there.
Yeah. it's interesting. And, looking at the numbers this week, Andrew, and as much of anything, you just kind of brought it up around hammering the over and talking about some betting numbers this week. I'm telling you right now, I'm riding Houston. Not because I think they're a great team, but right now Denver's favored by 10. And I'm not so sure Denver is going to cover that. I think they can cover that. But this week they're missing Randy Gregory possibly. Justin Simmons now went on the IR. That's a big part of that defensive backfield. You've got KJ Hamler out. I mean, you've got some decent ball players out for Denver. And the way they looked last week and lost to Seattle to be favored by 10 to me, that is almost a betting lock of the week. I'm quite honestly kind of blown away. Again, I think in an overreaction piece, I really want to see more Dameon Pierce for Houston. I feel like he was okay last game, but for some reason, Houston just decided to, thank goodnessly for the Colts, just decided to run Rex Burkhead. So, the other game in the division before we jump over to the Colts, we are blessed this week to get 2 Monday night games again. So we obviously have the Thursday night game between the Chiefs and Chargers. We've got 2 Monday night games and we've got a Sunday night game. So some good primetime work this week. The Colts or the AFC South has another divisional game, and that is on Monday night. To me, it is 2 programs going in almost polar opposite directions, where they're at Buffalo, but Tennessee goes to Buffalo to play Buffalo, coming off what, in fairness, can only really be described as a drumming, even though the score was tight, by the Giants' run defense, or the run game last week to Tennessee's run defense. Just a pretty poor performance. And the interesting part is, again, another team that you think is run heavy was 60% pass last week for Tennessee. So initial thoughts on this Buffalo-Tennessee game, and then we can dig in a little bit, boys.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I think it kind of – I don't want to sound too hypocritical because I just said, well, nobody knows anything about anybody, and then I'm going to come out and say something about how very average Tennessee looked. But let's just call it what it is. They outside of – a couple nice plays from Robert Woods and Westbrook Akina. I didn't see a whole lot of explosiveness for the Titans, and I think the Giants' defense at several points in the game got the better of Tennessee's patchwork offensive line. Derrick Henry, I think, had 60-something yards rushing, 70-something. I mean, he definitely wasn't the dominant workhorse that we've been accustomed to seeing the last couple of years. And I guess how it relates to the Buffalo game is Buffalo's run defense is phenomenal. Their pass rush is exceptional. Bringing in Von Miller clearly has paid off major dividends already. He had 2 sacks of Matt Stafford in the kickoff opener. I think Buffalo is Tennessee's nightmare matchup. I think this is an entirely different Tennessee team. Young receivers outside of Robert Woods, who's a veteran. A young-ish tight end in Austin Hooper. An offensive line that I mentioned earlier is very average. Buffalo's defense is going to come to play, and I think that Tennessee, given what I saw from them offensively last week, may be in a little bit of trouble. I don't anticipate Tennessee being able to run it down Buffalo's throats. If anything, I think Buffalo's going to stack the box and dare Ryan Tannehill and those new weapons, which he may not have a ton of chemistry with, to beat them over the top.
Yeah, I was not really super surprised. That was kind of my dark horse upset of the week, if you want to call it that, just because, and we've talked about it all off season, guys, like just how much Tennessee lost this off season. Key premium guys. You lose, especially on the offensive side, A.J. Brown, and you really think a rookie, as good as he might be in the future, you think he can immediately come in and make that kind of impact. It's not going to happen. We saw that week 1. He didn't. And then the same way on their defense, losing Harold Landry was a big, big loss, guys, because he had 12 sacks last year. So the Titans lost 2 premium guys at premium positions. And there were question marks, and there still are, about Derrick Henry, right? coming off that injury, didn't really look great in that playoff game when he came back. And, we're just like, will he get back to where he was before? And, we'll see if Tennessee runs him a little bit more, but I think there is just a little bit more in the back of their minds, or it should be like, hey, we probably shouldn't be making Derrick Henry run the ball 20, 30 times per game because it caught up to us last year. And right now, guys, who do you have that really scares you on this Tennessee offense? I can't really name a guy. So, yeah, all that to say, Buffalo is a team that looks locked in. I think, they have the best quarterback in the league, bar none, in Josh Allen. And, I don't know if it's really close. Maybe Patrick Mahomes you could throw in there too. But, he's definitely the best quarterback, in my opinion, in the NFL right now. And then you talk about the defensive side, right? You talked about it, Andrew, a little bit, like what they were able to do against the Super Bowl champs. I mean, that should terrify teams that are playing the Buffalo Bills this year. Yeah, I mean, I think Tennessee, we'll see, because I never want to count them out because of Mike Vrabel, and I do think he's one of the best coaches in the NFL. But all that to say, on paper, it's a nightmare for Tennessee. I'll just say that.
Yeah, it's, kind of stark contrast to the last game we just talked about. Buffalo is favored by 10, but they are at home. And right now they're calling for light rain in Buffalo in like 66, 71 maybe. It'll obviously change 9 million times before the game because, that's what weather does. But the piece that I was impressed with Buffalo last week was their run game. It wasn't like crazy yardage wise, but just the people that they mixed in, whether it was Zach Moss, Devin Singletary, James Cook obviously had the fumble, but and then you throw in the fact that, oh yeah, by the way, just in case everybody forgot, Josh Allen can also run the ball. I just think this is a nightmare for Tennessee. And I'm just going to read off some names that currently reside on the injury report. Right now on the injury report, you've got Christian Fulton, didn't practice with a hamstring. The backup running back, Dontrell Hilliard, who obviously is a big piece if you're not going to run Derrick Henry 30-plus times a game, right? He didn't practice because of a hamstring. You had Ben Jones, the center, was limited. You had Jamarco Jones, who was limited with an elbow injury. You had Taylor Lewan, who was limited with a knee injury. You've got Kyle Phillips, one of those young receivers we talked about, who did not practice because of his shoulder injury. And then if it wasn't bad enough because the other two tackles are already out, Dylan Reduns was also limited due to a neck injury. So that coupled with flat out a Buffalo team that in the overreaction, ilk of week one, I think looks all the part of a Super Bowl contender, if not a Super Bowl winner this year, after what they did to LA in an opening night. I think Tennessee gets steamrolled here, and I think they should be happy to score 17 points. That's just kind of my take. Anything to add to that, guys? And then we'll kind of jump to the game that everybody knows we're going to talk about for a while.
I think I covered it.
Yeah, I'm good here. I think we all covered exactly what we think is going to happen.
All right. Let's talk about the AFC South leading Indianapolis Colts going on the road to Jacksonville. Love to get you guys' take.
Well, for the Colts, it's been their house of horrors for the last 7 years. They haven't won a game in Jacksonville since 2014. And I mentioned earlier how they kind of came out flat against Houston a little bit. And if I didn't, I meant to say something. So I guess I'm saying something now. They came out flat against Houston. Like I mentioned earlier, before you knew it, they were down 20-3. It really took an effort from Matt Ryan, Jonathan Taylor, and Michael Pittman to really orchestrate this comeback. I mean, sure, you had a couple nice catches from Paris Campbell and Mike Strawn, and some guys stepped up in some pretty big ways for the Colts when they needed it. But I just can't help but think that I got to see it to believe it. I got to see the Colts go down there and finally put it into the most, I would say, the most absurd and quite frankly, the oddest losing streak I think the league has seen currently. I mean, Jacksonville, for the better part of the last 6 or 7, 8 seasons, has been the bottom of the NFL barrel. I mean, think about the last couple times these teams faced. 2020, Colts lost 27-20. Phillip Rivers was the quarterback at that time, and I think Gardner Minshew had a career day in completion percentage. I think he completed like 80% of his passes, which is absolutely absurd. And Jacksonville went on to lose every single game following. Last year, we all know what happened. 26-11, the game was never close. It was a winning in, losing, you're at home. And the Colts went in and for a lack of a better word, just played very, very horrendously. It was just an atrocious effort all around, defensively, offensively. Quarterback play certainly didn't help. And then, you look at Sunday's game, and I just think that this offense for Jacksonville may present some problems. You have a really, really solid vertical threat at tight end and Evan Ingram. And you look at the struggles that the Colts had facing O.J. Howard, a lot of cover three match. I think we saw several times last Sunday where, the seams are going to be open and the linebackers have to follow those tight ends, in those situations. And they didn't. Zaire Franklin and EJ Speed got fooled on a few different instances, and it led to O.J. Howard wide open up the seam. And it led to both those touchdowns. And I think if you're Jacksonville, you maybe look to take advantage of that with a really fast tight end that can get vertical and Evan Ingram. You look at Jacksonville's offensive weapons, Christian Kirk, Marvin Jones, Zay Jones. If the Colts are down Kenny Moore and you've got Stephon Gilmore, Brandon Faison, and Tony Brown in there, I just think that this Jaguars offense may present some issues for this Colts defense that didn't really show a ton until later in that game against Houston last week. And then offensively for Indianapolis, I think you've got to give it to your best player. You've got to give it to 28 and Jonathan Taylor. You've got to incorporate Nyheim Hines more. And if you're down Michael Pittman, if he doesn't play, it's going to be a massive, massive, massive game for Mike Strawn, Ashton Doolin, Paris Campbell. Someone's going to have to step up, because what Jacksonville more than likely will do is stack the box and say, okay, we're not going to let you give it to Jonathan Taylor. We're going to force you to beat us in other ways. We're going to force some of these other younger receivers that maybe have that don't have very much experience in the NFL. We're going to force them to beat us. We're going to force someone else to make a play.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm very concerned, and maybe hopefully they will all play. Kind of what I've heard from some of the reporters is that the Colts kind of feel some optimism towards some of those players like Pittman, Kenny Moore, some of those guys playing, but they will be probably limited a little bit. They didn't practice. So it's a little bit concerning, it's just like, what in the world? I think they both kind of tweaked something on Wednesday. So hopefully the day of rest that they took on, I believe it was yesterday, hopefully that'll be kind of helpful for them and just being as close to 100% as they can be. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to pick the Colts until the Colts prove me wrong. I'm sick and tired of picking the Colts just for them to completely embarrass themselves down in Jacksonville. I don't know what it is, guys, about week one for the Colts and about in Jacksonville for the Colts, but it's to the point where it's almost comical. It's just like, how, I don't understand. It's kind of like when New England goes to Miami and just stupid things happen. It's kind of the similar vibes there. Only I kind of feel like it's even like more ridiculous just because, you look at some of the times Jacksonville 1-15 in 2020, the one wins against the Colts. Last year, Jacksonville, one of the worst teams, I think the worst team record-wise in the NFL last year. Boom, they beat the Colts in Jacksonville. It's just ridiculous. And it's just so unacceptable. And guys, I honestly think that this game is a huge game for Frank Reich. I really do think that, because if this continues again, I really feel like he's going to be on the hot seat. And I think this might be, call me crazy, if this is a hot take, I think this might be his last year in Indianapolis if these trends continue, because this is just unacceptable. Jim Irsay has been immensely patient with Frank Reich and this coaching staff for years, watching them completely fail year after year after year. At some point, guys, the hammer has to drop. And I think Jim Irsay, from what we saw last year, his reaction, I feel like his patience is wearing thin. So if this trend continues here in Jacksonville, I don't know, guys. I don't think it's going to happen in season, but I think heads are going to roll in the offseason.
Yeah, if there's one thing that we know about Irsay just from past experiences, he does some out-of-the-box things. So I'd even say, kind of to follow up your statement there, Cody, I wouldn't be surprised if he chops ahead during the season. If they lose to Jacksonville this week, I could actually see Frank losing his job. It's time to stop getting cute. I don't want Nyheim Hines in on a 4th down play to run him up the middle. It's absolutely absurd. You have the best running back in the NFL. Derrick Henry won't even dispute it at this point, right? You've got an absolute stud who's an absolute bell cow, and when you gave him the ball in the second half, you rolled. Let's not forget, we actually rolled that second half. We did what all of us thought we should do against Houston, and we did our job. And defensively, don't forget, we're still without Shaquille Leonard, right? This guy's an all-pro, all-world linebacker. The bottom line is we ran the ball well. We actually passed the ball well. We had 517 total yards of offense. To me, it boils down to one simple thing. Last year, our success was in the turnover battle. Last week, we lost the turnover battle against a very inferior team to the Colts, talent-wise, for sure. And we walked out with a tie. We have to win the turnover battle. This is a Jacksonville team. They gave 305 yards up to Carson Wentz. Okay? So we're not talking about world beaters here, guys. We're not talking about exceptional pass defense. They turned him over twice, but he threw 4 touchdowns. Carson's a great guy. We've talked about it many times on this show. But flat out, Matt Ryan's a better quarterback. I think all of us would agree with that. The reality to the whole thing is we just can't lose the turnover battle. Look, last week, Isaiah Rodgers literally played 1 defensive snap. That can't happen. This is a Colts team. We talked about the secondary. He and Kenny Moore need to lock down that slot, because the one spot that I do have concern is Christian Kirk out of the slot, and he will run almost exclusively out of the slot. To give you an example, last week, he ranked 8th, by the way, out of all receivers for PFF last week. Last week, out of the 64 plays that he was involved in, he ran 51 plays out of the slot. So if you are going to prepare for a game plan and you don't prepare for him and his speed out of the slot, you're absolutely missing the boat as a coaching staff. I do think that sets up well for Kenny. I do think that sets up well for whoever we play on the outside that has been face-on, right? And I think face-on held up well. I think Gilmore played well. The one thing that I've been tooting his horn all offseason, the one guy that flat out has to step up on the backside this week, especially against a speedy slot, is Julian Blackmon. There are too many missed tackles last week. There were too many overly aggressive plays. And I understand he was out last year, right? There's probably just a crazy amount of excitement coming from him. But it just flat out has to get better. And can Kwity Paye carry on what he kind of ended last week with? Obviously had those 2 sacks late. That caused a problem. I don't see Etienne and James Robinson as a running game that looks to kill us this week. I see us getting beat by a single receiver. My opinion would probably be a slot guy like Kirk, and a single tight end in somebody like Evan Ingram. If we can win that turnover battle and keep those guys in check like we did in the second half against Houston, I think the Colts are fine here. But like you guys said, reality is, Frank, quit being cute. Call the right play. Call it in the right time. Ryan, no more turnovers. You're going to turn the ball over at some point, but you've got to control that. It's the same thing we just got rid of a quarterback for. At the end of the day, you can't have that many turnovers. When you turn the ball over twice, but you actually get, you have the opportunity to turn it over 3 or 4 times in a game, that's not something we want and need at quarterback. There's no reason to overreact, but I will say, with that being said, we've got a really good football team coming in here next week in Kansas City. And then we get Houston or Tennessee coming to town. You legitimately have a real opportunity here to take a real stranglehold in the division in the first 4 weeks, because as we talked about, Houston, Denver can probably go either way. Tennessee should get steamrolled. You could find yourself with a win here, being at the top of that division and having an opportunity to really put some distance on yourself in Tennessee in 2 weeks. Again, Frank talks about week to week, all that good stuff. I think those are all valid points. Bottom line, do your job. Go and do what you're supposed to do. I look for a ton of Ashton Doolin and Mike Strawn this week. because even if Pittman does play, which in fairness, if I'm going to sit him a game, I would rather sit him here so he's fully healthy for Kansas City and Tennessee. I think Strawn and Doolin had good games last week, and I think they showed you that while we're a running team, you can rely on them to catch the ball. So any final thoughts for everybody kind of on the overall thing and last week, the NFL, or anything you guys are especially watching this week that we haven't talked about already, fellas?
I just wanted to add one more quick note on the Colts. Turnovers. You had mentioned it, Adam. Got to be better. Got to win that turnover battle. My biggest thing with the Colts, from what I saw, is not that they couldn't move the ball. They were moving the ball pretty well offensively. It's just when they least expected it, Matt Ryan, for some very peculiar reason, fumbled it 4 different times. I think 3 of those, or 2 of those at least, were center quarterback exchange issues. You can't do that as a veteran in this league. That cannot happen. I don't think we'll see that on Sunday against Jacksonville. I mean, if we do, there's much bigger problems for this Colts team. And then I think more importantly is start out quick. Just start out quick. Don't, like you said, Adam, don't get too cute. You know, you can't have drops in the end zone like you had from Doolin and Pierce. Those were big-time drops that completely shifted the momentum of the game in my mind. You can't come out flat like you did, and you can't come out, being down 20-3 or whatever midway in the third quarter and have to have your team rally you all the way back. I don't care if it's Houston. I don't care if it's Jacksonville. Just, you said it perfectly, Adam. They have a golden opportunity. Golden. It's sitting on a silver platter for them to go out, finally end the streak in Jacksonville, get a win. You're 1-0-1. That's weird to say. And now you have a really good chance to be up, like you were saying, multiple games on Tennessee in the division, and you've got them coming to town in a couple weeks and a really good dare I say, phenomenal Kansas City team as well. You win on Sunday, and I think you're doing okay. I think the Colts are in a good position. But if you lose and you go to 0-1-1, are we talking about the same narrative of slow starts again? I mean, like Cody said, do heads, start to roll, so to speak? Does the seat warm up a little bit for Frank Reich and Chris Ballard? It's time to end the streak in Jacksonville. It's been far too long. It's time to put it into it and to start off, on the right foot and not get off to these 1-4, 1-5 starts.
I think the biggest thing for me, guys, is stop leaving points on the field, right? You saw multiple times where the Colts, they drove all the way down to Houston's goal line, and then they just collapsed, whether it's that 4th down, atrocious call by Frank Reich, whether it's the Alec Pierce drop touchdown. Like, they just kept, they were leaving points on the field where you think, guys, if they're, if the Colts want to be considered one of the best football teams in the NFL, like, they need to be good in those moments. And they just were terrible last week in those moments. And so it's kind of like, you can't get off to those slow starts and then give a team like Jacksonville hope. Because we all know what's happened when you give them hope, right? They, usually comes back and bites you in the butt. And that's what's happened down in Jacksonville, where you've notoriously struggled. It's like, no, you just got to take care of business. You just got to go out there, and the good teams, the best teams, they take care of business against inferior opponents. And the Colts have not proven to do that. They didn't prove that in week 1. So they have the opportunity here to do that. Hopefully they can kind of build off that second, especially that 4th quarter and overtime from the defensive side and the offensive side. Hopefully they can build off of those things, and they can come in firing. And that doesn't have to take 3 quarters for the Colts to get their butts into gear, because if it does again, I don't know, guys. Like, it's becoming tiring at this point. Like, and it's got to be tiring for Jim Irsay, because this team clearly has talent. Like, this team has, it's crazy that the team only scored 20 points, but they were the number 1 ranked offense, and I think the 9th or 10th ranked defense. So, like, just be better in the critical moments. That's where the good teams are separated from the great teams. And if the Colts can do that, I think they have a great chance to win on Sunday and win big.
Oh, yeah, big time. I'm sorry, one last note. Pass rush. I'll just make this super quick. Got to get home. You invested far too much. Quiddy Pay can't do it all himself. Washington, I think, had like 3 sacks on Trevor Lawrence last week. Jacksonville's offensive line is very average at best. Cam Robinson, Juwan Taylor at the tackle spots have some they're susceptible to, I think they struggle against power and speed rushers, which is exactly what you have in Ngakoue and Pay. If Buckner plays, he probably won't be 100%, so we'll see how that goes. But you've got to get home. You didn't get home last week against Davis Mills. I don't think you sacked him. You sacked him only once. Obviously,
we got him. Pay got him twice, but yeah, it was all at the end of the game where they were gearing up at him.
Correct. Excuse me. Yeah, Pay got him twice, and you sacked him once. That led to that strip sack. Is what I meant. Beg my pardon. Front four got to get home. Pass rush got to get home. You went and traded for Ngakoue. Pays a first-round pick. You traded a first-round pick for Buckner. Tyquan Lewis, when healthy, has showed some flashes. Second-round pick. You've invested far, far, far too much in this defensive line to just absolutely get no pressure whatsoever. You brought in an Ngakoue to help relieve some of the pressure from Pay and Buckner, hoping to get more one-on-one looks with your all-pro defensive tackle. And Kwity Paye obviously had a really nice game last week. I don't want to overdo it and get off on a different trail here, but pass rush has to get home. We saw what happened when they give Trevor Lawrence all day to throw. Last time these two teams met, and it ended up being one of the worst performances I think I've ever seen in my entire life from an NFL team. Get home, disrupt the quarterback, get Lawrence off his spot. He's prone to make mistakes when you force him into errant throws. And like I said, you've got the talent on the D-line. Take care of business and get it done.
Time to go to work, boys. It's your time. It's your game. Let's go win it, Colts fans. Hey, thanks for listening, everybody, and everybody have a great week. We'll see you back here next week. Bye now.